You're listening to How I See It, hosted by Han. You guessed it, that's me. I am here to motivate and inspire you with guests from all different industries and backgrounds. So get ready for personal stories of success, of growth, full of highs and lows, and of course, unapologetic realness. This is How I See It. You guys, I am so excited. I have Dene Logan here. She is a marriage and family therapist, coach, and the author of the book, Sovereign Love. Her work focuses on helping others get in touch with the deeper layers of their capital S selves, which she'll get into. I am really excited to have you on the podcast, not just because our conversation on the phone was so good, but because I've been like stalking you on Instagram and I love your content.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm so excited to get to meet you in person.
I know. It's weird because I feel like we've already met, but then we haven't. I feel like this is how I feel with everybody that comes on. I'm like, I feel like we've had such a deep conversation already. And then I'm like, but I haven't been able to hug you in person. Every guest that I have on that like their work focuses on healing and bringing people back to like full alignment has their own healing journey. So where did it kind of start for you? Like, how did you start to pursue this capital S? I also want you to get into that too, like what you mean by capital S self. Like, how did you get back to that?
I come from a background in depth psychology, which is rooted in Jungian psychology, but before that, I feel like I found my way to psychology by sort of my own exploration around therapy and my own healing journey, which had a lot to do with the way that I feel like certainly as women, we are socialized, but I would say just in general, we are socialized to abandon a lot of the way that we are in our essence to be what is societally acceptable, right? So there's all of this messaging that we get early on around how to be a good girl and how to fit into society and just like who we need to be in order to be okay in our skin. And it's so funny when you watch children and just the way that they are before certain stages of their development, before their peers start to influence how they show up, and certainly how we as their parents a lot of times influence how they are showing up in the world. They're just so free and they're so present and discovering the world around them, and everything is like wonder and fun. And then we start to mold them into what we have been conditioned to believe societally as a more acceptable version of who we need to be. And so we do that to our kids, and it's something that's sort of passed down generationally.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that, because just recently I feel like over the last couple years, I've been really trying to like lean into more of like figuring out what my true authenticity is. I have this like memory of like me in like middle school and like someone, and I think this was like kind of like hammered in at home too, but I think like the cherry on the cake was someone had told me that I was like too much and too bubbly.
Yes.
And it's so weird because now as an adult, I would never describe myself as bubbly. Like I'm definitely not that person, but it's interesting because this freedom you're talking about that I had at that age, it was almost hammered out of me. And now as an adult, it's like I don't even identify with that part of myself anymore.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought in, in middle school, or sometimes it's not just our family of origin, it can be our peer groups and messaging that we get around like what is like the cool way to be or whatever it is. But certainly it's so subtle a lot of times. And what you're talking about in terms of like the bubbly or the freedom or just like, too much is a big part of the messaging that we get as women when we're little girls. And a lot of times it's just like free in our skin and like, showing up without a lot of like contained energy and messaging we get around our bodies and all of these different things. And we internalize that. And there's a lot of ways that we start to make ourselves smaller. So that was certainly the case for me. And I think as I went along the path of sort of reclamation, as I like to talk about it. And I talk about this a lot when I am facilitating retreats and, with all of the people that I work with, about going back for that younger version of ourselves and sort of reclaiming who we were before the world started to interfere,
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Chicago and in Omaha, Nebraska.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Do you feel like it was all like society and the perception? Do you think it was at home? Like, was there a moment where you were like, fuck, I've left my authentic self and like I need to get back to it? Like I don't feel well. I think for me, like there was obviously a bunch of moments, but the depression and anxiety I was feeling, I feel like the core of it was like this violation of conscience, of authenticity. I started like pursuing, like working through like the chaotic childhood and like all of these things that happened that slowly got me to like more alignment. What was it for you?
I grew up in for the most part in Omaha, Nebraska. And at the time, I was sort of, the diversity. I have me and my brother were the minorities where we grew up. It's very different now. But at the time, I was a very sensitive kid. And I think I was really sensitive to being the other and being different, right? Yeah. And so there was a lot of messaging I got around being a model minority and, the things that I needed to do to sort of fight against the stereotypes that people had in the Midwest at that period in time around minorities, and sort of like little bits of racism that I would experience that sort of, caused me to sort of shrink or to feel like that there were things that I internalized around my self-esteem that I sort of, really wanted to fit in and really wanted to have people like me. And so I think early on that sort of showed up as like when I was young, being a party girl and really sort of like doing a lot of drinking and maybe some drugs and all of those things. But I think it's such a cluster of a million things in a patriarchal structure that we all internalize. I don't think that's unique to my experience, but that was probably a little bit of my particular flavoring of how I internalized
No, for sure. And I think over time, like we've talked about, like the violation of, is this what you're referring to? Like the capital self, like are actually who we are, it causes sickness.
Yeah. When I talk about the capital S self, a lot of times I'm speaking about our soul, and that there's so much that are sort of like masks of our ego construct and aren't like the truth of our essence, but who we early on learned that we had to be in order to, like, really as survival strategies to get along with our parents or caregivers, or to sort of feel like we weren't different, because all of us have two fundamental needs as human animals. We need attachment, and we also need authenticity. But when we're young, especially until we sort of develop that capital S self and a sense of authenticity, attachment will always trump authenticity because it's a survival need. And so human animals are sort of, the animal that come out and we're like aware that we need our caregivers for survival. Like, horses might be able to pillage and make it in the wild by themselves. We can't do that. And so we figure out early on how to survive by being who our parents or caregivers need us to be. And we get like these little cues. Like sometimes like you'll do something and your mom or dad will sort of oof, or like you won't get the grade that they wanted you to get, and they'll have a response to that. And all of that, I love to say, is sort of like solidifying the blueprints of our codependent tendencies. And that codependency is like, I'm good, I'm okay if we're okay, right? And so early on, we start to mold ourselves into what is more acceptable.
It's so interesting you bring up codependency, because I feel like a lot of women, like myself included, like I'm very like independent, like I would view myself as very like strong. And even in a romantic relationship, I don't feel like I'm super attached, but it's interesting because I feel like there is this sometimes level of codependency that a lot of independent people don't realize, because they think that it means almost like attached and needy, when really it means like you're making choices based on how you're making other people feel.
Absolutely. And you're right. Actually, hyper-independence is a response. So anytime we're sort of in response to something, it still has power over us. So if I'm really defending against being needy or being a burden, or people feeling like I'm too much, as you were mentioning, from a childhood pain point, a lot of times how that shows up is hyper-independence. And I don't need anyone. I got this. I'll take it. Like everything's on me. But that's also a survival response. And it's a lot of times rooted still in the same anxiety that cultivates a sense of codependency. Right? So they're two sides of the same coin, but they're both this thing of like struggling to be my authentic self in relationship to other people.
Yeah. You talk a lot about, and I know you're like mainly in like couple women, yes, but like also like couples and relationship. So in your opinion, like what is the difference between like love and like attachment? So many people around me are like in serious relationship. Like I'll ask people like, what do you love about your partner? And it's very like me centered, like how they make me feel. Is that like the attachment versus love? Like how do you break that down for your clients, but also like in your work?
I don't know if I would call this like a unique perspective on this, because I think it's something we're starting to awaken to more and more, but that so much of what we are taught about love and relationships is really rooted in certainly a transactional template of love, but I would say often like an ownership template. And that once I have this person in my life that I love, and they're my person, my partner, my boyfriend, whatever it is. They belong to me. And that sounds really sort of romantic and lovely in theory, but if you think about the things that belong to you over time, in the beginning, you're really excited about them. You love having them there. You're like celebrating them. And then you start to get used to them and you kind of take them for granted, and you start to feel entitled to all of these different ways that the things that belong to you show up. And, you know, with what you were just saying about some of the people that you know in relationships, it's not our fault, because it's so much of how we're socialized, is that love is about, you know, what I extract energetically from someone else versus, you know, the way that I see this person and I really love who they are. And as I was working with couples over time, what I started to realize is everybody's just competing for energy. We're really competing for, like, I need you to make me feel good. No, I need you to make me feel good, right? And when both people are doing that, it just sort of becomes like a battle that doesn't feel like love anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so if we understand that attachment is a survival need, we're still in sort of that survival space of believing I need something outside of myself to be whole. But that capital S self that we're talking about is like, your soul is perfect, whole, complete, ever evolving, but there's nothing that we actually need outside of ourselves to be whole. That's a distortion. But the purpose of loving one another is sort of to pour into another person and to see them. And if we understand that as souls, we are actually love, that is what we are. It's like the ocean believing it needs water to be, you know, full of water. We are full of love. That is what we are. But our work is to sort of chip away at all of the distortions that we've accumulated over a lifetime that have made us believe that we're something other than love.
Would you say this is like one of the biggest problems when you have like couples in your office, that there's like this expectation that the other person is supposed to make them whole?
Absolutely. And, you know, what's challenging about what we're actually doing in relationships, and this is like the unsexy aspect of what it is to be.
Healing is hot.
I mean, yeah, it can be eventually, right?
Yeah.
But early on, what we're doing is we're looking to be reparented a lot of times by our partner. And so we get, you know, sold so many ideas about like the one. And when I find my person, this is going to be the person that sees me and validates me and just makes me feel all these feel good things that I've been longing to feel for a lifetime. And in the beginning, a lot of times that's the case. And, you know, we're all getting all these surges of dopamine and feel good chemicals. But after a while, we've sort of been looking at each other for a while and we're a little bit accustomed to the way this person makes me feel. And we're not feeling all of that feel good stuff anymore, but we want it back. We're sort of like, you know, like drug addicts a little bit. Like, I want that high that I used to get from you in the beginning. And so we start like feeling shortchanged and competing for you to fill me up in the way that you used to, when really our work is to bring our focus back inward and say, what am I doing to really see myself and cultivate life force within my own life, so that as I do that for me, I can pour into this other person. And if both people are doing that, then there's reciprocity and there's a really beautiful, harmonious energy. But if not, we're just sort of in circular conflict and nobody's ever feeling like their quote needs are getting met.
Your partner should be like an asset, like to your life, in the sense of like feelings fade. Like, they really do. Like, the closest friends I have in my life, I can name off like the things I love about them and these things that they like bring to my life, whether it's like their humor or their smarts or their intelligence or like their talents. And I think that if you can't like name those things about your partner, the feelings fade. If you can't, I don't know, one, be whole in yourself, yes, but two, like look at the person next to you and like actually just love them for who they are and the things they have, I could see how it would fall apart.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny you say that, because before I became a couples therapist and doing the work I do, I was a yoga teacher for many years. And there's so much about the way that I work with couples that's really rooted in mindfulness work and just like really thinking about the way that I'm thinking about this, right? And exactly what you're saying. Like, if we treat this person that I'm in relationship with as though they are sacred and as though I don't know that they'll be here tomorrow, we show up in a very different energetic to our relationship dynamic. But so much of what we've been conditioned to believe about relationships is, once you're here, I shouldn't have to do that. But it's a practice in the same way that we would like go to the yoga mat and really be mindful of like what's happening in my body and how am I feeling as this is showing up. We can actually do that work of like cultivating gratitude every day for this person in my life, and how do I want to work to see them and be present with them. And I mean, I think that's all of our relationships. As you were saying, we can do that in our friendships and all of the people that we're lucky to have in our life. But it like really requires that we ask that of ourselves.
Yeah. Looking back at your own like kind of healing and where you got to, like how did you start to like get more in line with yourself, and how do you like coach clients to do that so that they can be in like healthy relationships and can like live their life in a way that's honoring their authenticity?
Yeah, I was married for almost 12 years to, just someone who's still one of my best friends in the world. And I think there's so much about the way that I started to work with couples and do this work that really shifted when my marriage changed form, because I never really before that like questioned all of the things that I was fed in terms of these societal templates.
Yeah.
I always say I became so much more of an effective couples therapist on the other side of marriage, because I think I just started to see what was really sacred about love and relationships, but also the things that used to trip me up in our dynamic, and just the way that I can challenge myself now when I feel frustrated with him a little bit, because there's the release valve of like this not being my person, that I can sort of say like, is it true? Am I entitled to this from him? Or is there a way that I can approach this differently that can bring a little bit of a different perspective and maybe some relief when I'm feeling frustrated? And so it just challenged me to be a lot more mindful, mostly because I wanted to be mindful of how our child experienced us interacting with one another. And so it's this thing of like, just because it's challenging does not mean it's impossible. And I think so often we'll say like, if I had $1 for every time someone told me like, it's just not that easy. And it's like, well, nothing's that easy, but we can actually like bring mindfulness into the way that we're living our lives. And it gets easier when we build the muscle of being mindful about whatever it is.
Yeah. I talk a lot on the podcast about like getting uncomfortable for the sake of real comfortability, because it does feel like incredibly uncomfortable to start making different decisions or to hold back on like pursuing entitlement. It's hard to like kill expectations of like everyone around us when it feels so foreign to do that. A lot of my own healing was like feeling almost like anxious and scared to make decisions that felt so foreign to me, though I knew they were aligned like with my authentic self.
Yes.
And to your point, like it's not easy. That's why they call it the work. And it takes like a lot of trial and error. And it's still hard, but it gets like easier with repetition.
Yes.
But like, how did you start to, I know you said you started doing yoga. What were some of the practices that got you to a place where you were able to make like that uncomfortable choice and start slowly turning the like codependency and the expectations into like a whisper?
I think there's so much about my path that has been so incremental, and it's been all of these tools for many, many years that I almost feel like we're the preparation for doing this work of certainly healing codependent tendencies within myself, but also supporting others in doing that. And it's just, a million little things of like keeping the promises that I made to myself, some of the things that you're talking about. And, I think there are ways that we're just defending against our alone. I can't remember the philosopher that said this, but like all of man's troubles stem from like one essential question, which is, when I'm alone, do I like the company that I keep? Right. And I think for most of us, if we're honest, that is where the anxiety comes from. That is where some of the challenges that we feel relationally are, that we're sort of defending and sort of distracting ourselves from our own selves and like being with ourselves in a really present-centered way. But the thing about anything that feels challenging is like, as we do it, we start to see like big feelings, and overwhelm eventually subsides. And there's no feeling that I will feel that will actually kill me. If I can stay with myself through that feeling and ride the wave, I start to teach myself that I'm capable of doing that, right? So yeah, it's so much of like different tools that I accumulated in the practice of staying with myself. I started to like, what tool do I need today? Maybe I need to go on a hike. Maybe I need to check in with my therapist, whatever it is. And it started to just feel like a lot of those things started to be like a reflexive response versus the other things that I might have done in the past.
Yeah. Cause I feel like at the end of the day, like if you can't sit with yourself by yourself, it's because you're like not aligned. Like you're not living authentically. And I think it gets confusing when like the decisions that seem like the like first reaction like feel authentic, but then you are left like, why the fuck am I unhappy? So I think it's about like rewiring, like what choices do I have to make that are going to like make me feel authentically aligned. But it is like really painful to have to like sit in the uncomfortable. But I almost feel like if you can master sitting in the uncomfortable, like you will get to the other side. It's just, you got to wait it out.
Yeah, and we have no context for it. Like I often say, we're a society that does not value spiritual solitude at all. We're really conditioned to be codependent from our fairy tales early on, making us believe that once I find my prince or whoever the person is, then I will be in sort of the linear space of satisfaction and arrival. And I think what I see so often with couples is like, I've been believing once I find my person, then I will feel like I'm at a state of arrival and my life is good now. And of course, no other human being can be that for us. So we feel really shortchanged and let down. And then we're sort of in this space of like, what do I do with this energy now?
It's a lot of pressure to put on someone else too.
Absolutely. So it's sort of like understanding that it's not our fault. Most of us didn't get these tools. I think like the younger generation, like they're doing mindfulness classes and stuff for kiddos, which I love to see.
I love that.
Yeah. But I think most of us didn't get a lot of, just tools or understanding that was going to be something that was challenging. So we've got to be really compassionate with ourselves.
Yeah, I feel like something I've really learned over the last few years, just like through my own healing, and as I'm like trying to now step into like romantic relationships, friendships, even like trying to create like a new dynamic with my family after all this time. I feel like I was taught from like a very young age that like love has like expectation.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't realize it until like I was getting into relationships, and I like watched so much of your content, and like you talk a lot about this, how we want people to change for us or like say the right thing to make us feel something. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's some of the reparenting work. I think there's so much about the way that we're trained to believe that our power resides outside of us, right? And that if my parent or caregiver or whoever it is could just see me, then I would have that relief, and then I will feel seen, and I'll be able to have that sense of self, or that I belong and matter, and all of these things that are just very human things for all of us to feel. But the trouble is the inner child that lives within each of us knows the precise thing that I would need to hear in each moment to feel okay. Whoever we're interacting with, whether it's our friend or our partner or our parent or whoever, they don't have that script, and they have their own pain points and things that they're struggling with, right? So a lot of times we are outsourcing our power by believing I need someone outside of me to comply with whoever I believe I need them to be in this moment for me to feel okay in my skin. And so it really becomes about, how do I start to cultivate that relationship with myself? How do I really be in the inquiry around the story I'm telling myself about what I need? And is it true that I need this particular person to show up in this particular moment in this way for me to be okay? And what I find a lot of times, Hannah, is that like when I don't need that from this person, life, the universe starts to give me that, or another person that shows up and says those things or offers the thing that we're looking for from this person. But it's really our ego mind that wants to control and really be in the space of scarcity, and that, my needs won't be met if I don't fight to get them met, right?
Totally.
And so it's just like, how do I start to challenge that I am held, that things will be okay, but I just don't know how it's going to unfold. I have to be in the space of trust.
Yeah. I love what you said about like how we expect people to like know the script, because I feel like for me, a lot of the problems I was having like in interpersonal relationships is that I was like overly sensitive, but also like assuming the worst, that they like were out to get me and like attack me. And so when they didn't say exactly what I needed to hear, it was like, oh, obviously they don't like me. Obviously we're in a fight or whatever. And I think even like, it sounds so simple, but it was like life-changing for me to like start assuming that like everyone I've chosen to give my time to, so like if I'm doing that, I obviously think they love me and I love them. Like assuming that those people like mean the best, instead of like assuming they mean the worst, and like getting better at like pausing, and like if I need clarification, just like asking like, what do you mean by that? Or like, instead of just like jumping to conclusions that everybody is out to get me, it completely changed my relationships. And just assuming the best, like giving people the benefit of the doubt that like the way they're saying it is exactly like what I mean, but they don't know my script.
I love that so much. And it's funny, I often say our ego mind is like a rabid dog, like looking for all of the ways that someone is out to get us, or, really attempting to keep us safe by providing our mind with these loops of the worst case scenario, and really, like you said, why other people are out to harm us. And there's this example I give in the book that came up really in my own life, but I think this happens so often with couples, is that like we'll, with our partners or whoever the friend is, we'll offer, like you were saying, but I often say like the least generous interpretation of their intentions, right? Yeah. So that's sort of this thing of like, you know, if it's me, I'm doing, like, if I'm late, it's because I hit 5 red lights. If they're late, it's because they don't care about me and they're inconsiderate or whatever the thing is, where, you know, when I had a child and I would sort of notice, because this is the thing that comes up for like every couple, is always like, he leaves his socks on the floor, like I'm the maid and I can't live like this and all of these things, right? And so I would notice with my child, I think at the time he was probably like 5 when I noticed this, but he would like come in from school and he would just like start stripping off his clothes and throwing them on the floor, and then he'd be off to the next activity. And I would be like, he's not doing that intentionally to, you know, treat me like I should be cleaning up his clothes. But like, obviously with a child, I understand that. And so I'm giving the interpretation of the more generous interpretation of the fact that he's just not thinking about me, anything. He's thinking about the next thing he wants to do, the next activity. But that's true of our partners as well, right? If they leave their socks on the floor, it's not like malicious. It's not like they're like doing this to make you angry. Exactly. They're like thinking about other things, worried about what their boss said, you know, trying to catch, I don't know, the game before it goes off, whatever the thing is. But we sort of like, our ego mind that is sort of that activated child self thinks everyone should be considering me all the time. I should be on everyone's mind. And I probably am. And they're doing this intentionally because they don't care about me or they're trying to hurt me. That's never the case, right? So if we say, the more generous interpretation of someone else's humanity is that they are human and they are going to fall short. And I can certainly make requests of the people in my life, but it's nobody's job to parent me other than me, really.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Do you think it goes back to like the way we like view love, a part of our life, as more of like an attachment versus like love?
Absolutely. I think so much of the way that I've started working with couples is not really rooted in an attachment model, which most of the models of clinical psychology or orientations are, but more in a differentiated model, which basically means this relationship is sort of mirroring back to me my pain points for me to grow and expand, but really take a lot of personal responsibility for where I feel activated and why. But an attachment-based model is sort of, you know, we're attempting to create a secure attachment and heal all of the childhood wounding. And the trouble with that is, you know, that can be really great for creating a lot of safety and like we're secure in this container. But what I saw over time was like the majority of couples that were coming to see me after they'd been together for a while were really struggling, frankly, with their sex lives. And if I am, you know, in a secure attachment with you, that can be great for creating a lot of safety, but not a lot of eros, not a lot of life force. Like we're not meant to want to sleep with our children, right?
I feel like it's good for communication, but not the other stuff.
But not desire, right? And if you think about how you feel about someone when you first meet them, you don't feel responsible for their emotions, right? And it's not that over time we don't want to cultivate some of that safety. Of course we do, right? But we have to have a balance of both. And that's sort of like the masculine and feminine that I talk about. That's the structure, the safety, the stability, but also the aliveness, the eros, the life force that we need.
Could you get a little more into that? Like you talk about how like we need masculine and feminine energy from both people in a relationship.
In Jungian psychology that I was saying in the beginning, there's sort of like, it's ancient wisdom, but I think in terms of the world of psychology, Carl Jung was sort of the first person to talk about the anima and the animus, which are these energetics that are alive within all of us, right? So all of us have both masculine and feminine energy within us. And there are just ways that we've really been conditioned societally to feel like I am meant to outsource a part of my energetics and get aspects of whoever I am, maybe my underdeveloped aspects of myself from another person. And so like tangibly, the way that that shows up is like one person is, you know, normally the more linear, the more right brain, the more like handle the business of our life and all the things that need to get done. And one person is more the like free flowing, go with the flow. We'll get there when we get there, and we find each other, right? Like one person likes to stay up late, one person likes to get up early. It's like we always find the yin to our yang. Now that can feel beautiful if, and the big if we celebrate that in the other person. That's not what most of us do. Like we're attracted to that difference in that other person in the beginning. But then I joke all the time that we sort of spend the rest of our lives making the other person wrong for not processing the world the way that we do, right? And if we understand that the purpose of the other person is sort of to show us what are maybe our underdeveloped aspects of self, or really for us to come into right relationship with integrating both, the safety and the aliveness, the masculine and the feminine, the dark parts of who we are with the light parts of who we are. It's like this dance of duality that all of us are in, certainly within our relationships, but also within ourselves.
Yeah, I feel like this goes back to like really viewing your partner as like an asset instead of trying to like make them who you are or who you want them to be. Yeah. Epitome of like, I feel like dating, and especially as like a woman, I'll say, because that's my experience, is like trying to change someone. Where is the boundary there though? Because I think sometimes it can be healthy where you're like, this is toxic that you do. Like, can you start communicating like this? Or like, can we like meet here? And then it changes and it's good. But like, where's the line where people are just like waiting for someone to change or trying to force someone to change? Like, when does it become unhealthy?
Well, it's funny you say that because, an aspect of the feminine energetic, and all of us, although we have these energetics within us, we all have like a core energetic. And so I don't want to say most, but a lot of times a woman will be a core feminine energetic, right? Not everyone. But if I am a woman who identifies more with my core feminine energetic, then that is the space of expansion. We're always seeing where things can go. The feminine is like the oracle energy. So I'm constantly looking for like progress, expansion, like where this is going to move into the space of evolution, right? The masculine is more structured, stability, a sort of linear energy that is like stay where we are. If it ain't broke, don't fix it type of energy, right? And so what ends up happening so frequently is we as women can really tend to fall in love with potential, right? And I see who he could be if he just gets A, B, C, and D together. And the trouble with that is there's a part of all of us that is like our inner teenager that just longed to be loved for the truth of who we were by our parents that will inevitably resist changing so that you will love me, right? And the tough thing is, Hannah, I have known so few people in my life, and certainly in the space of doing this work, that really create change that is like sustainable change for any other reason other than they themselves like either get uncomfortable enough that they decide to, or it's just like from an internally motivated place, but very rarely because they're nagged into submission by someone else.
It's so hard. I feel like that is like my toxic trait. Like I'm like in relationships, but also friendships too. Like I'm constantly trying to like push people to like pursue their potential and then left disappointed. Yes. And I think it's again with like the expectation, like setting these high expectations for like everyone around me, and then back to like love being like, this isn't real love. Like if you love these people, there shouldn't be this expectation for them to do what you think they should do or what you want them to do. But romantically, I think the potential thing is hard, because if you have this amazing connection and someone's showing up for you and it's great, but they're not doing like the one thing you need, it's kind of like, why am I here? Or like, how long should I wait? Or like, why am I in love with this person's potential when that's not who they are? And I think that's like the devastating part about interpersonal relationships, honestly, is having to like relinquish and like surrender. Because you're right, like people's change only happens if they choose it.
Yeah, and it actually becomes a real form of self-abandonment in ways that we aren't really conscious of what we're doing. And what I mean when I say that is, if we think about how hard it is for most of us to create that lasting change, that sustainable change in our own lives, like how many of us are like, I'm going to start the eating healthy tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm going to like work out every day next week or whatever it is. Like for most of us, sustaining that change can be really hard. Like despite like our actual best intentions, it's hard to get there and stay there, right? But when it comes to other people, we tell ourselves the story, if they loved me, they would change for me, right? Or if they loved me, my influence would matter to them. But that's really sort of an internalizing something that actually has nothing to do with us. People aren't not changing because they don't care about us. It's that it's hard, or whatever their resistance is, isn't even conscious, right?
Yeah.
So we continue to sort of like outsource our worthiness, that if you loved me, you would do this for me. And that would mean that I was worthy of your love. And a lot of times that's a childhood pain point where we tend to, I find, in sort of a repetition compulsion, find people who remind us of whoever that parent or caregiver was that didn't love us in the way that we longed for them to. And so we will like pick a partner that sort of reminds us energetically of the way we felt with that parent or caregiver, and then we'll try to mold them into the thing that feels like, I feel seen by you, I feel loved by you, but really like we're abandoning our inner kiddo when we do that. And our work is just to say who they are and how they are showing up is really separate from me. And if I can't love them for who they are, if nothing ever changes, then that's not actually about my love for them. That's about me.
Oh, so fucked up. Like, damn.
I know, it's one of those, damn it. Yeah.
I know. I had a man I really care about, like, look at me recently and be like, why do you think this is about you? And I was like,
you're like, damn. Gonna come at me like that?
No, really, there was this moment where I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I do know. I'm like, I do know, looking back at like my childhood and like my parent dynamics, but it was this moment where I was like, you're right. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it sucks because I think it's also a way that we can like grab onto control. I think for me, like having control feels so good because like the surrender is so hard. I think for everyone, but specifically if you grew up as like the parentified kid, like the control feels so good to know like what's happening, to have your plan of like what you're going to do. And so I think like also having that expectation and trying to fix constantly or like believe in people's potential is a way you can kind of control as well and like push people to do what you want. It's just not realistic. Like I can lead the horse to water. I can't like push its head into the trough and make it drink.
That part, you know, and I would offer a lot of times it's giving us the illusion of control.
Yeah.
And I love Peter Crone's work, but he'll say often life will give us people and circumstances to demonstrate where we're not free. So if I need to be able to control something outside of myself in order to exhale and in order to be free, life will give us ways that that's just not a sustainable strategy. And so that person will either disappoint us or be removed from our lives in a way that feels really destabilizing or aggressive. But there are all these ways that we were never meant to, as souls, believe that we need someone else to acquiesce to who we need them to be in order for us to be whole. That's just an illusion, right?
And I think it's so interesting because the more I've been able to surrender, especially over the last couple years, because I feel like I really started like diving into like this self-work when I was 23. I'm 28 now. So it's been like, I feel like I'm on my 5-year. I'm like, I feel good. But like, I feel the last couple of years I've been really able to like practice what I preach and practice what I've like learned. And I think it's funny because to your point, like there was this illusion of like, well, if I do this and have these expectations, I can control. But it leaves you feeling like shit. And then I think the more you actually surrender, though it's scary at first, I mean, the same thing with getting uncomfortable for the sake of real comfortability, like you realize like, wow, like actually surrendering and like dropping expectation makes me feel better. I do feel more in control.
Absolutely. And I think there's a way, like I've never met an overfunctioner who wasn't carrying a whole lot of resentment, but really wishing that everyone else would love me the way that I'm pouring into love into them, right? And so it's a little bit like when I reclaim some of that energy and start pouring that into myself, then all of a sudden I can be in relationship with people without sort of like doing that thing we were talking about, like sort of like keeping score and I'm doing this, but you're not doing this. And it's like, we can actually be present with one another. But to your point, I mean, it takes practice and we've got to give ourselves so much grace and time.
How do you encourage your clients? And like in the book, I'm sure you talk about it too, to like start pouring into themselves more. Like what can people start to do?
Yeah, you know, I think it's that thing I was saying about like going back for that younger version of ourselves and just starting to like, what would feel like fun to me? And I talk a lot about like the feminine that we're reclaiming is really like our ability to be, yes, in our bodies and have fun and play and all of these things. And play used to be like a really hard word for me. I love it now. But like, I was very sort of like, constantly in the space of productivity and making things happen. And that, you know, has shifted over time. But like the reclamation of that feminine aspect within all of us is how do I trust in life enough to feel like if I let go of that need to control that we're talking about, I will be held and things will sort of fall into place as they're meant to. But it's like we get to have fun. And like for me, that was like going back to a younger version of myself that loved musical theater and just like really giving myself that opportunity to like play and like be in the space of listening to music that I used to love. And like, okay, little Dene, what else do you want to do? Right? Like what else used to be fun for you? And that can be just like getting back in our bodies, allowing ourselves to dance, whatever, you know, and if that feels like, that's a lot, like maybe going to a yoga class and like noticing how I feel in my body. But it just like, it's so not structured, which is a lot of times hard for us as well, because we live in a really wounded masculine paradigm that tells us everything should be structured and everything should have like an outcome that we're searching for, but allowing ourselves just to be without, a desired outcome is really the work.
Yeah. I love how you brought up trust, because I definitely feel like, if I'm being honest, I think it's this lack of trust that like the world is going to provide, or that I can trust other people, or that I can trust things to unfold the way they're supposed to. It's like this very much like, well, that never happened, so like I need to control everything. And I think it's about like building trust again, even if it's in small ways, like being able to like let people choose where to eat and what the plans are, or like trusting that like if you don't plan anything and you just go on a walk, that you're going to enjoy yourself. Like trust is a huge part of, I think, getting back into alignment, and like having love for yourself too. Like if you don't trust yourself, then you're not going to be able to trust other people or do anything, honestly.
Absolutely. And I think the trust a lot of time is trusting in life. And I think there's a young part of us a lot of times that is processing the world from the way that we saw it when we were a child, and we didn't know that things were okay. So when we saw conflict between parents, or parents were struggling with something financially, or there was chaos, or whatever was happening when we were little, the way our little minds process the world is like survival. And I don't know that things are going to be okay. We don't know enough about the world and life yet to know that we're going to be okay. And so those sort of survival responses kick in, and it's like, I need to control my environment to keep myself safe. But those strategies continue into adulthood. And so we continue to feel like I need to control the world around me in order to be safe. But if we can sort of hold space for that young part and really play the tape through, right? So it's like, if I don't pick the destination, like you were saying, or like have all of the plans laid out, like what do I imagine would happen, right?
Yeah.
And play the tape through on the worst case scenario. And a lot of times, like I love to have clients do a brain dump for me, and it's like, okay, and then what? And then what would I do if like that bad thing happened, right? And then what would I do? And like we show ourselves, I would actually be okay, because I'm an adult now and my adult self can take care of me. But a lot of times we have to like give ourselves the felt experience in our bodies of like what we would do to keep ourselves okay, so that we remind ourselves like, not only am I okay because I am able to take care of myself, but then also look back on all the ways that we've always been okay. And like things have eventually, we were held, we were okay, I'm still here.
Yeah.
And that's the evidence that I was okay.
I was going to just say, like, I feel like a huge part of getting out of those spirals for me, and I can just nick it in the butt quickly, is like looking back at like my timeline. Like I have overcome like this. Like, I think this is okay. Like, I think it'll be okay. And it does empower, like it builds confidence. Like, okay, I got through all that shit. Like, I think this little hiccup is going to be fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said you were a theater nerd. I need to unpack, because I'm a theater nerd.
I didn't say nerd, Hannah, but
I know, but I'm a theater nerd too. So
yes.
So did you do theater growing up?
I did like musical theater, and I was in show choir, and I used to go to show choir camp. And
oh my gosh, I love that. Same.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you would have played a lot of fun roles with all that gorgeous hair.
Oh my God, no, I was so weird. I was so awkward, like when I was younger. I feel like I I think the moment, honestly, that I like stepped into true authenticity, like everything else like shifted with it. Like my energy was better, and I was more confident, more audacious. And so like, no, I definitely was like not cool or didn't do anything cool, but I love musical theater. Like every time I'm in New York, I make sure to see like a couple shows, and then I still listen to show tunes in the car when I'm alone.
I love that. I'm like, kindred spirit energy. I love that. And I think there is something about theater that gives us an opportunity to be present with ourselves in our body, and sort of like some of that somatic work of like experiencing myself through all of the sensations.
Yeah, you get to be like unapologetic too, because you have to like take on a character and really like not care. I feel like it's the same way like I see like people with opera, like you cannot be like an opera singer unless you have like zero like resistance, because if you're embarrassed even at all, or like there's any type of not confidence, like you're not going to be able to execute. You almost have to like joke a little about it.
Absolutely.
What's your favorite musical?
Oh, I love that question. I mean, I feel like I grew up on Les Miserables, and it's always like such a special place in my heart. But I mean, I love all. I was just watching Wicked on the plane. I just went to Spain, and I was like watching Wicked like 4 times. I was like, yes, I'm watching it again.
I was so bummed that there's going to be like 2 parts. I was like, what?
I know.
I got to the end, and I was like, are we kidding me? I was like crying in the theater. My best friend was with me, like shaking her head. Like
I was
don't
crying
understand.
too. I feel like I was
so
thinking of my
emotional.
best friend as we were I think you're having
it
one
is
of those
so emotional. I mean, I think when you like grow up in the theater like space as well, and like you see it like that, like I mean, the first number of like every Broadway show, I just immediately start bawling. I don't know why, just like the aesthetic experience of it all. And it was such a dream of mine for so long that I think like you're there, you're like, wow, I'm crying again. It's not even like emotional. Where were you when you decided to write the book? Like, was it just after like years of like post healing, obviously, though the work never stops, and then like working with couples where you just like, I have to write a book?
Yeah, you know, I talk about after my marriage changed form that I just became like a relationship anthropologist. Like I just was like so curious about all of the messaging we get. And I was just like, how did I get here? How do we get here? How are all these couples that I'm seeing getting to this place? And something I'd always been curious about, even before it was my own life and marriage, was like when two people decide to not be together anymore after they had decided to spend their lives together, like where does the love go between them? Like how does that just dissipate to the point where people are like in divorce court fighting it out and like saying horrific things? And a lot of times with the clients that I work with, like their parents' divorce was like the really devastating aspect of their childhood that they are like working through, right? And so certainly I didn't want that to be the case for my child, but also just like wanting to understand love and what makes it so challenging. And you know, with these masculine and feminine energetics and the whole thing I was starting to understand about how we are outsourcing our power by believing that I need someone else's energy and to extract it in order to be whole, it just started to come to me and like downloads. Like I was just like seeing things as I was watching couples, and I started to like formulate how if like one person, and a lot of it had to do with like attachment energy. And that like the wounded masculine energetic that I talk about is like avoidant energy, and wounded feminine energy is like anxious energy.
Yeah.
And so I would see like which person was in which energetic, because there's almost always like the duality of a pursuer distancer in our relationships.
Yeah.
And so I would sort of like be watching and I'd be like, God, if the person who's in the more wounded masculine or avoidant energy would just take up more space with like the truth of where they're feeling overwhelmed and what feels historic about this, and, you know, really get into their healthy feminine energy of vulnerability and taking up space, all of a sudden that person who's in the more anxious energy and really feeling like they need this person to come back to them and see them and validate them, that person would see them, and then they'd be able to hold space for them, but they'd be in that healthy masculine containment energy. And so I was like, this is fascinating. Like I'm starting to understand how this works.
I feel like frustrating too, probably, because you're like, come on.
Well, but what was cool was I would start to like have them try it, and we would be like working through it, and they'd be like, this is amazing. This is shifting things. And like, where can we read more about this? And I'd be like, I think I'm going to write a book about it, because it's not that I was making it up. I mean, I was kind of making it up as I went along, but it's just a very different way of thinking about relationships than we've been conditioned to, which is like, I need to change someone else. Everything we've been talking about, where the real power was like, if I just change my energy, we're energetic beings. So the energy between us changes.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to read it. I'm like, definitely need to dive in. I'm like, now that I'm like, I feel like in a place too where I didn't think I was gonna like really like, not that I didn't think I was gonna be in a relationship, but I feel like I was definitely like wounded by relationships, just like growing up too. So I think like now that I'm like almost 30 and like I see it for myself potentially, and so I think like I've been really practicing like this kind of stuff. So I need to read the book.
I mean, I love this for you. You're already like an old soul.
Oh yeah,
and really
I like
self-aware,
tell people all the time that like I came out of the womb at 40.
I mean, you
like,
you have a lot of energy that is much older than your age, but also you're about to go into your Saturn return, which means there's so much about how you're experiencing yourself in the world that's going to shift, because it's like a really massive differentiation process. But I think all the time I'm like, if I had known these things and like thought about these things at your age, my God, like beautiful, but also the next relationship that you're in, it just means like I'm going to be starting with a baseline of a really different intention.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that. I feel like it was funny, because I feel like for a lot of my life, it was very much like this happened to me, like all this stuff happened to me. It's unfair. And I think I've been able to shift into like, no, like all this stuff happened to me, and now I have like wisdom and understanding earlier, and like can like do stuff like this, and it's fun.
Absolutely. It was the preparation required. Right? Like I always say, like none of this is random. And these were the things that my soul chose to be a part of the curriculum for who I was meant to be.
That's so powerful. I ask everybody who comes on the podcast is like the last little question, looking back at your journey and like what you went through and the ups and downs, and now like the work and the book being done, like how do you see it? How do you see it all?
It's all perfect.
That's cool.
I think I'm so grateful for everything. There's nothing I would change. I mean, I don't really believe in mistakes anyway, because I think it's all, again, that curriculum that our soul requires. But it's amazing how, what is his name? Soren Kierkegaard said life can only be understood backwards, but it needs to be lived forwards, right? And the thing is, like, so often when we're in resistance to life, we're not understanding that there's a long trajectory of why we need to go through all of the experiences that we need to grow through, right? But if we can just really trust that we're always held by a larger force and a larger intelligence, then we don't have to be so like in resistance. And as we've been talking about, believing that there's anything to control, it's all perfect.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing and just being vulnerable. Please share where people can follow you and find the book.
Well, thank you. DeneLogan.com is my website. I'm Dene Logan on all of the socials. And the book is Sovereign Love, A Guide to Healing Relationships by Reclaiming the Masculine and Feminine Within.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me, Hannah.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you leave here feeling motivated and inspired. Do not forget to rate and review the pod on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And don't forget to follow How I See It Pod so you can keep up with podcast updates and see who's coming on next. And if you're not already, come join the fam and follow at How Han Sees It. Thank you guys.